Welcome to Music Crush, a new music podcast hosted by Flute New Music Consortium. I'm Elizabeth Robinson.
And I'm Nicole Reiner. If you like the show, please rate and review it on the platforms wherever you listen to podcasts, particularly on Apple Podcasts. It really helps people find us and grow the show. And of course, you can learn more about Flute New Music Consortium at flutenewmusicconsortium.com. Elizabeth, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Yeah, I'm all right. I just had this funny experience yesterday. I listened to our podcast.
Oh, is that a first for you?
No, but I listen to, we record these in batches and then, when they come out, sometimes I've forgotten some of the things that were said. And so it's kind of a fun treat to listen again. And so yesterday I was listening to our interview with Chris Grimes.
Oh, that was a fun one because you guys were classmates back in the day.
Yeah. He was less interested in reminiscing than I was, but that's probably better for the listeners. It probably wouldn't be that interesting to hear me talk about the kegs they used to get. Yeah, I think it was the first episode of this season. So it came out in January of 2025. And he said a lot of very intriguing things. But one of the things he was talking about was he was talking about slap tongue. But he was saying, oh, I'm too old. I didn't learn in this way. I don't know how to do slap tongue, so I'm not going to do a piece with slap tongue, which I think, of course, you could replace with any extended technique or anything else that you want. And it was funny for me. Like in the moment, I remember kind of cringing because that's always been my reaction to people who say, oh, I'm too old to learn this, or this piece is too hard, or whatever, But now, he was saying he's 53, I'm 50. And I'm just starting to wonder if that's reasonable. Or like my brain is starting to go in that direction with some things. Not with extended techniques, maybe, but like there's this one piece that I feel guilty for not learning. You've learned it and played it. And I feel like I should learn it. And every time I pick it up and try to read through it, it's so hard. And I don't think I want to do it.
Are you going to tell me what the piece is, or do I have to wonder?
No, absolutely not. But, for me, I think what it comes down to is that I don't like the piece enough to put the effort into it,
Oh, that's totally fair.
But I wondered that about Chris too. Like, are you saying you won't do slap tongue just because nothing compelling has come up yet that makes you want to do slap tongue? But it just makes me think about, like, am I getting to this point? Does everybody get to this point, eventually where you kind of draw a line in the sand and say, all right, there's enough new stuff that's come out that I don't feel comfortable with, that I'm just not going to do it. Do you have any thoughts about that for yourself? Have you ever come up with any non-negotiables that you just don't want to touch?
I think I'm probably more in the headspace that you are, that there is not a technique that I won't try. There are definitely some of them which come more naturally than others, and there are some which I feel hesitant to do in public because I don't feel like I have enough control over them. And I want to come back to that in a minute because I think I have some thoughts on that too. But I turned 40 not horribly long ago. And I keep seeing, memes, or you and Alex Shapiro talked about, getting to your 40s and having no more fucks left to give. And I find that I have a lot less patience for a lot of things than I used to. And for me, at this stage in my life, there's not a slap tongue technique that I don't want to do. But there are definitely lines that I draw in the sand of things I don't want to do.
Hmm.
I remember you and I talked on the podcast about how there was a certain standard of hotel that we refused to drop below. That's a relatively new boundary for me, is, comfort. And I think we talked in the same podcast episode about how there was a time not that long ago when I would, if I had a late rehearsal, I would drive overnight to get home so I didn't have to pay for a hotel at all. And now I won't do that. And I'm getting to a place where if I have to teach to a certain time and the rehearsal starts at a certain time and there's not time for me to get there and eat, I won't take the gig. Which I think if you told me that even we'll say 5 or 7 years ago, I would be appalled that I would ever turn down a playing opportunity over a sandwich. But as I'm getting older, I find that comfort matters a lot more. I'm going to say comfort, but I think it's just, taking decent care of myself matters a lot more. And there are other boundaries. We're recording this over winter break. It is right now early January, so New Year's resolutions are on my mind, and there are other boundaries that I don't know if I'm ready to fully articulate in public, but there are things that I'm like, do I want to keep doing that? I think I might be too old to keep doing that. And some of it is, basic stuff like sleeping in a bed,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
other things are, types of gigs. Do I really want to take this type of gig? Or, there was a time when any opportunity that seemed like it might advance my career in the direction I wanted my career to go was something I needed to latch onto. And I have found myself wondering if the full expression of how I might have imagined my career 25 years ago is possible. And it's like, do I really want to run myself ragged for this thing, which may or may not ever happen for me? Or do I want to stay home and watch movies in a pile of cats? And
Yeah.
sometimes the pile of cats feels a lot more appealing. I don't know if that's age or if that's cynicism or what that is, but as Chris was talking about slap tongue, I thought, there's a lot of slap tongue in my own life that I think I could jettison and maybe be happier or more well-rounded because of
Mhm.
it.
Yeah, I mean, not taking gigs that you know are going to suck just feels like such a treat, which is so sad. I remember the first time I turned down a free gig. And I was like, "Ooh, is this okay?" But I just like, oh my God, I'm going to drive for 4 hours and not get paid just so I can shake someone's hand. And a big one for me, my birthday's on the 4th of July, as you know. And it's not like I do anything super princessy for it, but it's kind of nice to just like have the day to chill and day drink like all my neighbors do. But, as a musician, you rarely get that, especially when you're young and you need every gig you can get. And I remember very clearly the first time I got called for a 4th of July gig, to sub with an orchestra and play outside, which I absolutely hate. I always hated playing outside, and it's 100 degrees, and there are mosquitoes, and I hate the cornball music. I remember the first time I really stopped and thought, do I need the money for this? No, I don't. I'm not going to take it. And it felt like the most amazing birthday present I'd ever given myself. And I haven't played a 4th of July gig since, but like I think it's something, it's age, of course it's age related because it takes so long to work up to it. But I remember thinking, wow, I'm getting somewhere that I'm finally able to turn down really shitty gigs that I don't want. Like this feels like another notch on the belt or whatever. I
Yeah,
want to use the word.
I think I'm talking about something similar or adjacent, but I find myself in my second teaching position that is flute and. And you said this in an episode we recorded relatively recently, or that I edited relatively recently, that you felt like there was a level of proficiency required to get a job, but past that, non-flutists can't really tell the difference between this flutist and that flutist or whatever. And that thought and second flute and job have been kicking around in my head a lot lately. And I think I've realized that my university cares very deeply if I am proficient in my instrument. But because of the nature of working for a university and because of the nature of flute and, especially in a position where the and is in many ways larger than the flute, I don't know if they care how proficient I am. I think you have to tick the box and you don't have to go further. So I think I've come to the realization that as long as I'm doing an on-campus recital, which is respectable, I don't think my employer cares if I play flute. Past that, I need to be able to teach lessons and I need to be able to provide, a good experience for the students. But I don't think it makes a difference to them if I am playing with regional orchestras. And in fact, if the regional orchestra is going to cause me to miss class, they would prefer that I not. So that introduces the thought that, maybe this regional orchestra gig is for me. And if it's not for work or for tenure, it's a hobby. And is that hobby worth being out late, still having to get up early and come, teach my theory class or have somebody else teach my theory class and come back and, we've talked about augmented sixth chords slightly differently, so I have to untangle the ball of confusion that my students are in. Like there was a time when I was like, yes, just take all the gigs, not so much for the money because I've always lived in such far-flung places that the money might cover gas, but it usually doesn't. But the opportunity in building the resume and becoming the superpower flutist, and like I may edit this out later, but I'm beginning to think that I will always be flute and music theory. And when you are flute and music theory, no one cares what regional orchestra you've played with recently. So who am I doing this for? I don't think it's for my employer. I think it's for myself. And that does beg the question, at what point does this regional orchestra gig become slap tongue? Like, I'm doing it for myself, but like, am I having a good time anymore? And so I think I may need to start rethinking who that's for and what that's for to decide where my priorities are.
Have we talked about this before? There's this bassist Brandon Shaw who wrote a little ebook that I like to use with my careers class and keeps a blog, or did at one point keep a blog about freelancing and maybe startup musician is what it's called. And he talks about the 2-3 rule whenever you're assessing whether or not to take a gig. You should ideally have two of the three elements in place in your favor, and those elements are money, people, and music. And you can
Yes.
interpret those things however you want. But in case we haven't talked about it on this podcast, I think it's a great model, and you can decide how seriously you want to take it. And he even says sometimes you're going to only have one of those three things in place, but it's really meaningful to you. So if you decide that you really love playing orchestral music and this is the only way you're going to get to do it, if that's only, all you have is the music category checked, it's still valid as long as you're cool with it not being about the other two, that kind of thing.
We've talked about that, and I think I had created my own sort of value system that
Mhm.
had a pretty strong Venn diagram with it. And I think since the way back when I lived in Kansas and you were driving multiple hours to get to any orchestra, I think for me it has not ever really been about money because I was spending as much as I was
Right.
making. It is just because I think I always wanted to be an orchestral musician, and that's not, practical for more people than it is practical for. And so it was like, well, I won't ever have that full-time career, but I can do bits and pieces of it. So this is my little treat for myself. But as we found ourselves in, South Dakota and the orchestras are further away, the cost to time ratio has gotten even further skewed. I don't know. I don't know if it's as if the fun offsets the other stuff as much as it used to. And I don't know if that's about distance or age, but I do think, and I think this is sort of what you were alluding to. I do think when you start closing doors like that at this stage in life, they don't tend to reopen with as much ease as they might have if you were, just finishing an undergraduate degree. So my hesitation has always been like, I can quit these regional orchestras and I can tell these personnel managers that sometimes call me like, hey, your orchestra is great. I can't do this anymore. I don't know that they would start calling again if I changed my mind down the road. And that's a little scary.
Yeah. Yeah. You framed this as, the fact that your music and theory, and that is definitely valid. I mean, your assessments, the way that you get evaluated is really different from the way you may be trained in grad school. And I think that's true for a lot of people because more and more of us, if we did all performance degrees, we're definitely in the classroom
Yeah.
as a serious part of our job, a third or a half of our job at least, or maybe more for some of you. Even people who only do flute, I think you bring up a point it's always been a puzzle to me. Because when I was in school, I wanted to know what the rules were, and I'll just follow the rules and I'll be successful. And like, what are the things that are important and what do I need to know how to do? But then every job you get, you have to just like read the room. You've got to have a vibe check and figure out, okay, what are my, Jason likes to call them jokingly, our benevolent overlords, our administrators. What is this current iteration of benevolent overlord value? And if you're lucky, you get something blatant. We have an annual review here at UW, and afterwards, it's a pain in the butt every January to fill out all that paperwork and arm wrestle with the electronic system. But then afterwards, I get very clear feedback from my department chair. I like these things. I wish you did more of this. I recommend blah. And that's particularly helpful because I'm on my fifth department chair at
Sure.
UW, and every department chair has had a slightly different interpretation of what is most valuable for the department. So, for instance, I learned recently that these regional orchestras that I've been saying no to because the playing is not very good and the drive is far in a snowstorm and the pay is shit, and I've just been saying no when I don't feel like it. That was the wrong answer. That was fine for my last four department chairs, but my current department chair wants me playing in one very specific local orchestra that I'd been saying no to for years and wasn't getting called for. And everybody's got to negotiate that puzzle every time they either go to a new school or just have somebody else in charge, which is exhausting.
I Yes, we had two different department chairs in my time at my previous university, and the pandemic was happening in the middle, so there were some variables, but it was wild to me how different the same job was between the first department chair and the second department chair. And I, as you know, am not always confident in my ability to read the room for the benevolent overlord. So I feel pretty confident that I understand the expectations of my current department chair, and he has definitely expressed that he would like my priorities to be in the classroom serving the students, and that happens to be in this job at this time. Some of the upper level music theory classes, and he thinks I do an excellent job of creative research and activity, but maybe too much of it. So dial it back. And that becomes a tug of war too, because do you shape who you are and what you do around excelling in the job you have, or do you live to your fullest potential and hope that the job that you have will come to appreciate you for the special snowflake that you are? Which is a risky thing to do in this day and age in a tenure track position. I think if it weren't work, if it weren't feeding my dogs, I would say like this is just who I am. Deal with it. When faced with the possibility of going up for tenure and them being like, "Well, we told you," that becomes very stressful for a very type A flutist.
Yeah, and never mind all the bad behavior that you never know about, all the difficulties that your other colleagues create. I mean, have you ever discovered this? I mean, like over the years, I have learned little bits and pieces of like how hard I've tried to be compliant, how hard I've worked that is to be compliant and to follow all the directions. And my greatest fear is getting in trouble at work. Everything I can to not get in trouble. And then I find out, like no one else no one else is as concerned about it as I am. And I actually had more leeway in certain situations than I thought I did, which are past now. And, I can't get back those hours of sleep that I didn't have. But
Oh, with it being early January, I have just gotten my course evals for my fall semester back too. And one of the comments that I frequently get is that I don't treat students all the same. They think that I play favorites. And when I look for the nugget of wisdom in that, I think that they're responding to the fact that I'm just more comfortable with some of them as humans, which I think is normal.
yeah,
Some
I
of,
think
some
that's
of them are nicer, and some of them are really demanding or need things in a specific 5-minute window when I'm trying to get class ready and I'm distressed because I have another thing I need to be doing, but they're, not dismissing it outright. I think, oh, this is just a mismatch of the way that my brain works and their expectations. And they don't know the full story. And so I look around the department, and the student that lives in all of our hearts says, oh, well, the rules are different for some faculty than others. You said you were being given more leeway, and I think, like you, I don't want to get in trouble. I don't ever want to be in trouble. I want to be perfect. And I have a boss who's never going to tell anybody that they're perfect. That's not how he's wired. And I intellectually know that, but the type A student that lives in my heart is like, no, I need an A and it needs to have a plus beside it. And you can't tell me I'm perfect. And we're a mismatch in that way. And then you look around and you're like, well, why did that person get that thing and that person gets this thing and I get this other thing? Like, this doesn't seem fair. And intellectually, I can say, I don't know all of the details and there are probably reasons. And I bet they're not nefarious. But yeah, I forget where I was going with this, but you said something about, finding out that the rules are fluid. And if they were written down in a specific way, I would feel a lot better. But because they're not, you'd sort of look around and think, I need to do what everyone else is doing, but nobody else really has the same job I have. And we're all wildly different professionals, so that's only so helpful.
Well, and you don't know how you can see from the outside what your colleagues are doing and you think they're successful because they're tenured or whatever, but you don't know what your benevolent overlords actually think of them. I made that mistake in my first job. It was a very disorganized place. It was very dysfunctional and leadership played favorites, and it seemed like probably the squeaky wheel always gets the grease, but it was really rewarded, and it seemed necessary to get anything done at that school to just be difficult. And I was looking at my colleagues and I was seeing them make demands and say, you have to do this or else this isn't going to work and this is all I can give you. And I thought, okay, I'm going to screw up my courage, and I'm going to pound my fist on the desk and know that I'm doing this for the good of the students. It's clearly not about feeding my ego. It's about doing a good job for you here at the school. And it was not well received at all. In fact, I ended up getting fired. And I looked back, I always, whenever you make a mistake, you really want someone to just sit you down and like process it and tell you what to learn from it. And that does not happen when you're not a student anymore. It's just like, see you later, dummy. So I spent a long time on my own, just like the little hamster up in my head, just constantly spinning on that wheel, just like, what can I learn from this so I can stop feeling bad and just move forward? And one of the things that occurred to me was, oh, I was modeling my behavior after full professors who were straight white men.
Mm.
Why? Why was because those are the people who were getting the work done, and those are the people I admired the most for the jobs they were doing. And so I picked the wrong models.
You were talking, and I didn't want to interrupt you, but I wanted to ask if you were modeling yourself after men. This
Yep.
this has been on my mind. I've said on the podcast, it's my department is very man heavy, and
It's a sausage fest over there.
I think they're all lovely. I've never been in an environment like this before, and I find myself encountering, issues or roadblocks that I've never encountered before. And I more and more frequently am asking, is this because of the environment or is this because of the gender disparity? And I recently saw a video on TikTok, which later got blasted into the ether because people didn't feel like the person talking should be talking. But it was a gentleman who was sharing his observation that men don't consider pushback unless it's very loud and it's very aggressive. But then on the flip side, if a woman is loud or aggressive, she's hostile.
Mhm.
And I've been kicking this particular TikTok anecdote around in my head because I can't seem to strike the right balance of asking for what I need or want in a way that seems to be received or heard while also performing I'm gonna say collegiality, but I wonder if it's my gender. I can't strike a balance between, this is a thing that I probably need to be successful at insert activity and being heard and taken seriously without also stepping on someone's toes and offending someone, which like I'll be the first to say my people skills are always a work in progress, so it's totally possible I'm just being a rude puppy. But, I hear a little bit of that in your story, or I wonder if I'm hearing a little bit of that in your story.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah. And we don't know much about the makeup of who listens to any of these episodes. We know what country they're from, but not much else. So, maybe somebody's listening to this and rolling their eyes. I don't want to use the boobs and ovaries as an excuse for any difficulty I've had in life, and I really don't feel that way. But it is, yeah, it is. There are just so many expectations that the person you're talking to has in their head. And if only there could just be like a light board, built into their foreheads. What is that like, what's that name for the news that's just constantly scrolling at
Oh,
the
the
bottom?
ticker?
Yeah, just like a ticker, just like, tell me what you're thinking as I'm talking to you right now. I'll try to fix it.
Yeah. I mean, I think I'm on the same page as you. I'm not necessarily saying that problems that I've had are because I am a woman, but it does add one more thing to the list of things I have to ask. Like,
It's a thing. Yeah.
is this because I have wildly misunderstood the situation? Is this because I do not understand the mood that my tone of voice and or word choice and or face are conveying, or is this like a gender thing? And I find that I wonder about it more lately, mostly because I'm the only one in a lot of these conversations. It could just be my new weird thing to be insecure about. We won't know until the end. And at that point, what can you do?
There's a lot of really intelligent writing and talking about this topic now, which I appreciate. I don't know what it would have been like to be in my 20s, when people really started talking about the soft skills problem of gender disparity in a social context. I feel like I thought I was a feminist in my 20s, but when I look back now at some of the pop culture and some of the things that were done and said professionally to me or to my friends that I didn't bat an eye at, it was a lack of awareness. It's like always a work in progress. You're always learning more and more what things might mean and how to interpret them. I wonder what it's like to be a student now with this level of engagement and this level of kind of discussion all over the internet about how gender plays a role in this. But also, how hard it is to be an academic. I mean, that information is something that really surprised me when I got out of grad school. And I feel confident that my graduate students will not be as shocked by it if they choose to stay in academia. Although I have to say, fewer and fewer of my grad students these days want to be in academia. We ended a master's at UW. We don't have a doctorate in music, and I'm sending fewer of my master's students onto doctoral programs, not because they're not capable of getting into a good program, because they work their tails off and they're great, but because they don't want to. They came to learn some more stuff as a master's student, and now they want to go do something else, but not stay tied to a university.
You and I have in common that we were both at a lot of different universities or programs before we landed where we are. You have been at your current position a lot longer than I have. And I start to despair of ever knowing that feeling. But do you think you can ever be fully prepared for what it's like to be an academic?
I think there always has to be a lot of on-the-job learning. And I think for myself personally as a student, yeah, I was not aware of that gap. I think it's unavoidable. You can theorize and you can be told X, Y, and Z scenarios exist, but you're gonna experience something a little different. And the most important thing that I think I was bad at as a young professional getting out of grad school was that fluidity, that embrace of fluidity and that ability to think in a flexible way and just like take in the information and go with it. my brain kept wanting to, like, this is wrong. This is unprofessional. This is not the way it's supposed to be. But who cares? That was the school I was at. It was that way, you know? And I personally, I'm not going to blame the educational system. I personally was looking for hard and fast rules for black and white, and there's a lot
Yes.
more gray. And I think there is just a lot of on the job training and that flexibility, that ability to say, all right, what are the rules now is something you have to practice, but something I didn't even realize I needed to start working on until things got real uncomfortable for me.
That's interesting. My doctorate was a Doctor of Arts with no M in the middle. And part of that was a heavy emphasis on teaching, but also part of that was a heavy emphasis on preparing you to be in a place where you could teach. So we had to take a class. I forget what it was called, but we took a class that basically walked you through the job application process. In theory, you ended that class with job application materials. Not that that did me a lot of good because a lot of time passed before my applications started yielding interviews. We did a lot. We did a lot of practice with what an on-campus interview would be like. Which, when I finally landed one, I was so deeply grateful for. It did not feel as alien and weird as it could have.
Amazing.
Although there is an element of like this is happening and you have no idea how it's going to go down. But like I feel, especially now in my old age, I felt very lucky that I took the class when I watched some of my classmates who were only doing masters at that school go on to doctorates and then go on to job application processes, and they had no idea what was going on. Or at my previous job and at this job, we've had some younger faculty members who are in their first position, and they say things sometimes that in my heart, I'm like, oh, honey, no, that's not how that works. And I feel really fortunate that someone told me that before I had a degree in hand, because I don't think I would have been smart enough to figure it out. These people that I'm talking to are miles ahead of me as far as social awareness and whatever, and they haven't figured it out. But then you get to actually doing it and you're like, what am I even doing? What has happened? It doesn't line up with what I expected. And I think that's what you were saying. The expectation and the reality are so different. And I I feel like I've been dogging on my current university a little bit in this conversation, but I we had a series of events near the end of the semester. Well, we had a series of events in the middle of the semester where I was starting to get really frustrated because people weren't behaving the way that I expected them to.
Mhm.
And then we had a series of events at the end of the semester where they also weren't behaving the way that I was expecting them to, but it was like really nice about the things that were important to them. And I came home just frothing and in a tizzy because I couldn't understand why they were being so nice about this thing that didn't matter when they should have been nice about this other thing that mattered. And my husband, God bless him, said something to the effect of, Elizabeth, they're being nice about the things that are important to them. And I've been having this crisis ever since that maybe all conflict that exists in my workplace is just a matter of me having expectations of people that don't line up with their realities. Like maybe I've invented all of this drama, as it sounds like I did for myself this past semester, where I was like, we have a calendar. Why aren't we putting events that I need to know about on the calendar? And I'm like losing my mind about this calendar that somebody else doesn't think is important at all. But then, fast forward 6 weeks, and this person dragged themselves out of bed at dark o'clock to be at an event because I was speaking at the event, and they felt it was super important that they be there to support me. And they were in the event and they stayed for the whole thing until the last possible minute before they had to go to their meeting. And they took some pictures so that I had photographic evidence that it had happened, and their pictures were actually way better than the ones that my husband took. And I was just like, this is so genuinely kind, and I'm having such a hard time reconciling this with this person that I wanted to throttle about a calendar 6 weeks ago. Maybe the problem is me.
Well, I mean, can't it be everybody a little bit? I mean, probably everybody else is experiencing some sense of why the hell does she keep talking about this calendar? And then hopefully they realize, oh, I guess she cares about this. I don't know why, but yeah. So I think, God, did you just wrap up all of 20th century existentialism as a philosophy in a nutshell? You know.
Maybe. I definitely wrapped up my winter break existential crisis for you, so there's that.
Yeah, I mean, it's always. God, I just wish everybody could speak plainly all the time. I wish I could say like, what do you need from me right now and trust that the answer was going to be honest. And sometimes I can, and I love those people the most. I feel the most comfortable with them. I feel like I'm lucky to be now at a school where I can do that with enough people that I have learned how to be a good colleague. I couldn't learn how to be a good colleague at the other school because it was illegal to just have straightforward conversations about things, It was like an allergy everybody had or something. But yeah, there's so much going on in your head that is a result of everything that you've experienced and all the baggage you carry from that and the experiences you have and the things that you were taught at your school and everything. And then every one of us is walking around with that whole universe in our heads that dictate all of our priorities and our personalities, and nobody's is the same. There's some overlap, but
Sure.
it's so hard. Yeah, it's everybody's got their own priorities, and they don't even realize that maybe they're, kind of trying to, they don't maybe realize how unfair it looks from the outside or how uneven it looks. I'm sure
Yeah.
that person who showed up to that event would have been very surprised to know that you were very surprised that they cared about it, you
Well,
know.
I had flat out told them they didn't need to get up, and they insisted, no, this is really important. And then when they were there, I found that I was kind of touched in a way that made me think, oh, maybe it is a little important. This is really cool that you showed up. But
I'm glad you had that.
yeah, I'm in my third year here, and there's a third year review, which is the last big benchmark before tenure. So I do think the type A student in me is really worried that some of my grades aren't good and some of my grades are really good, and like how does this average out? And there's not a rubric, unfortunately, for tenure until you get it. So I've spent, I think, a lot more time and energy during this third year thinking like, am I a good fit for this place? Like I'm really good at these things. I'm feel like I'm not doing these other things the way that maybe folks want them done. I think a department should work this way. This department works this way, and there's some overlap for sure, but there's some stuff where I'm like, if I built this from the ground up, I'm not sure I would have put it together this way. And I assume that they feel the same about me. Like she's doing great at this stuff, but if we built her from the ground up like a little flute theory android, maybe she would do these other things. And so you think about fit and you're like, do I, sort of like with the orchestra gigs, do I contort myself to fit this box? Do I remain the shape that I am and assume that my good qualities are enough? Or because there is this push and pull between the shape that I need to be and the shape that I am, like, is this just not a good fit? Like, am I stressed about this because this is bad for me? Or am I stressed about this because it's the third year of a tenure process and I'm human? And there were some dark moments earlier in the fall where I was like, the shape that I am doesn't fit into the shape of container that I need to be. And then there were some moments near the end where I think because I had been like, well, fuck it, I'm just going to join the circus. I was maybe more open to letting people just be the way that they are and meeting them where they are, which is not a skill of mine for anybody listening to the podcast. I'm aware of it. But there were some moments where people were really great about the stuff that was important to them. And I think maybe if I made a list, some of those things would be on it, but maybe some other things would be on it higher. And so maybe the problem is through the lens of the perceiver. But also, like, when I sit back and let you just be who you're going to be, the calendar thing still drives me bonkers. But like, some of you are really nice. I don't know.
Maybe it's maybe the best approach to life, whether it's in the job situation or with an individual person, is just to imagine that you're looking for clues. You're just always trying. You're just always looking for clues. Give me your user manual, and you get that by trying to look for those clues in their actions and their speech, but particularly in the actions. That's really
Yeah.
what reveals what's meaningful to them.
Well, then the flip side of that, I have a couple of close female friends that I talk about things like this with, you notably on the recordings, but a couple of other people who are off camera and shall remain anonymous. And, a couple of them are talking about, people pleasing tendencies that particularly seem to be taught or ingrained for women because it's our job to be pleasant and serviceable. And it's so hard to find the line between I need to meet you where you're at because this is who you are and how you are, and we are stuck in a workplace together, and fighting it's not going to make you be a different person. And also, these are the non-negotiable things that I need because this is who I am and how I am. And there's that push and pull between I need to, meet another person where they're at, but also could you meet me midway because it doesn't matter how hard I try, I'm never going to stop caring about the calendar, you know? And it's hard to know where that line is that you're being unrealistic because I want what I want and I want it now. And I can get a little aggressive about that sometimes. But it's I can also be a little rolly over and stupid and be like, well, nobody else cares about the calendar, so I'm dying on the inside, but I'm just gonna say I don't care about the calendar when, I'm having like an existential crisis meltdown because stuff I need to know about is not on the calendar.
I wish I had something wise to say here.
Being an adult is gross. I think if I could restart this conversation, I would say I'm trying to figure out what my slap tongue is. I think I'm to a place where I'm starting to realize that I can compromise on some stuff. And I'm starting to realize that I'm old enough and set enough in my ways that I can't compromise about some other stuff. Which things are the slap tongue? The hills you're willing to die on, and which ones are the ones like, this matters to me, but I can tell that it is not something you are constitutionally capable of. So I am electing to let it go so that we can have a better working relationship,
Bringing it all back to the slap tongue. Good.
I told you the Chris Grimes conversation it is a theme for my season of life right now where I'm thinking like I'm old, I can tell I'm getting grumpy. I feel like I need to draw some lines. Slap tongue is not one of them, but I need to draw some lines. What are they? And am I prepared for whatever consequences those may yield? Chris seemed pretty cool with not getting asked to play the gig with the slap tongue. I don't know.
Yeah. Work in progress.
Boo. Thank you for joining us for another episode of Music Crush. You can subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. You can also support the podcast, read show notes, and learn more about FNMC by visiting www.flutenewmusicconsortium.com.